Chapter 9:25. Aya, don't be so cold. Russell shook his head helplessly. Can't we be like in the past? Decades ago, you held the Book of Destiny in your hand, but you stood by and watched as the last institution of the Utopia was canceled from the catalog. You did nothing and didn't even say a word. Now, you come back with your old face and tell me, Yangtze, we're all companions and we have ties. Who's the cold one, Russell? The old man retorted. Letting you walk into my house and sit across my table is already my last courtesy. Do you want more from me? In the silence, Russell did not speak. Huaisher paused and glanced at Russell. However, Russell did not look at him and continued staring at his old friend. Back then, it's always different now. Yangtze, the existence of the Utopia has never depended on the Book of Destiny. No matter how loud my voice is, it won't work. He said, you should know that after the fall of heaven, the collapse of the Utopia was destined. After so many years, what are you saying now? Yangtze shook his head. It's like an old lover who wants to get back together, finding his ex-wife, and saying that we can start over? You really live in the world of morning dramas, Russell. It's not too late, Yangtze. At least we're all still alive. Russell shook his head. As long as we still exist, there's still a chance for the Utopia to be rebuilt. Before that, no, it's already too late, Russell. Yangtze interrupted him expressionlessly and told him, you're already too late. She said, a few years ago, I'd already passed away. In the silence, Huaisher's movements stiffened. His eyes widened in a daze. In front of him, the old woman raised her hand and took off her face. Following the gaps in her wrinkles, she revealed the countless gears and tiny structures hidden under her face. When her pupils contracted and dilated, the camera hidden in her eyeballs slowly adjusted its focus. First, it was her face, then her chin, cheekbones, and forehead. Finally, the brain was empty, and only a device like a clockwork engine was slowly turning. I'm already dead, Russell. A hoarse voice came from under the steel. Don't tell me you still don't understand. Huaisher was in disbelief. She couldn't believe her eyes. Now, he finally understood why Russell had said that she was the best biologist and mechanic in the entire Utopia. She had actually replicated him perfectly, including the origin substance waves and the aura of his soul, even all the memories of the past. Even after death, the human-shaped tombstone remained. He mocked the visitors who would come after so many years. After a long silence, Russell lowered his eyes and asked in a hoarse voice, when did this happen? Last year in October. Yangtze sighed. She woke up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. She fell and had a cerebral hemorrhage. I think it's time, right? When people get old, these kinds of messy things will happen. She rearranged her face. She lifted the lid of the soup pot and said to the two guests, eat, it's already cooked. Huaisher ate 2 mouthfuls. He was no longer in the mood to distinguish whether what was in his mouth was delicious or something else. Russell put down his chopsticks and asked, before she left? She was probably very sad. The old woman replied calmly. She had just quarreled because her granddaughter wanted to study liberal arts. Before she left, she was still thinking about getting her child back on the right path. The apartment management fee was too high. She should have saved the money that she couldn't use up. Also, the ingredients in the fridge. No, I'm not talking about that. Russell was in disbelief. She never mentioned us when she was alive. No, the old woman replied firmly. The old man replied flatly. How many years ago was that? Russell, don't think too highly of yourself, okay? Or do you think you're more important than your son and granddaughter? Don't talk nonsense. In the years when she died, she talked about a long more than you did. Russell was even more confused. Who's Along? The old woman glanced at him coldly. A dog. Therefore, Russell was speechless. She's already dead. Why do you still care about that? There's nothing you can't get over. Yangzi said, you have to learn to let go. However, Russell did not give up. He still stared at her, as if he could see something from the past under that mechanical face. Is it Yangzi or someone else who said this? Just think of it as Yangzi. The old woman was still calm. She was operating like a machine. She told him coldly, it makes no difference to you now. After a long time, Russell withdrew his gaze in disappointment. When he picked up his chopsticks again, he paused and asked softly, how was her life in the last few years? Very satisfied, but also very lonely. Yangzi replied, she had both a son and a daughter, and her family was prosperous. Such a life is a blessing for anyone. As for some shortcomings, there's no need to care about them. The only regret is that I couldn't attend my granddaughter's wedding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been created. Maybe in another 2 years, I can stop working. She raised her hand and added rice for the 2 guests again. After that, no one said anything. After dinner, the old woman cleaned up the dishes and told them, the bedroom on the first floor has been cleaned up. The bathroom is on the right. Please feel free to use it. She paused for a moment, bowed, and said, please have a good rest tonight. The old woman turned and left. Huaishe and Luo Su looked at each other and didn't say anything. They also had nothing to say. In the middle of the night, when Huaishe opened his eyes from the sofa, he saw that the bedroom light was still on. However, he didn't know if Russell had fallen asleep. But what about upstairs? In the dim light, he stared at the ceiling, as if he was a lecher who wanted to see a beauty through the wall. But there was no sound upstairs. It was quiet and deserted, just like every tomb. It was just arrogant silence. Letting time go by, she had passed away. No matter how beautiful the words were or how strong the determination was, it couldn't change the result. Look, you are high-spirited. You are full of determination. You are full of confidence. You have stepped onto your own path, but you have come too late. Everything is too late, because people will die. I can't wait for your good news. Damn it! Huaishe sighed silently and closed his eyes. The next morning, after breakfast, Yoko Kusanagi sent them to the door. Well, I wish you a safe journey. She said goodbye calmly, and finally looked at Huaishe. Good luck to you too, young man. Only at this time, she had the agility that machines didn't have. She smiled kindly. Perhaps this was the blessing left by Ms. Yanko before she passed away. Huaishe was stunned for a moment and nodded solemnly. Russell reached out and took his luggage from her hand. Finally, he asked, don't you go to the park today? Do you want to go together? You don't have to go today. Yanko replied with a smile. Genshin is a careless child. As long as I appear once in a while, she won't suspect anything. When I get married and have children in the future, she won't be too sad when I pass away, right? Russell, have a safe journey too. You're already so old. It's time to learn to give more room for young people. Then Russell nodded, as if he wanted to say something, but he was stuck. In the end, he smiled and hugged his old friend in front of him. Take care. Take care. Yanko stood at the door, smiled, and watched them leave. After a long time, until they disappeared from her sight, she calmly turned around and went home, closing the door. She walked through the quiet living room, watered the potted plants, took out the clothes from the dryer in the morning, and calmly ironed and hung them up. Finally, after a day's work, she returned to the sofa. Just like that, she sat silently. She didn't do anything else. Only the occasional sound of horns on the road outside the window could be heard. The sun slowly rose in the sky and streaked across the sky. The sunlight illuminated the dancing dust, rising and falling in front of her eyes. The lonely silence engulfed everything. For a long, long time, it seemed to have lasted for thousands of years. She blinked her eyes. After a long time, she blinked again. After confirming that there was nothing unusual, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She collapsed on the sofa weakly and reached out to scratch her itchy scalp. When she finally scratched enough, she took out a bottle of beer from the fridge, raised her head, and gulped it down. Finally, she heaved a sigh of relief. Phew, I almost couldn't fool him. Fortunately, I'm quick-witted, she complained helplessly. I knew that Russell was unlucky enough to come here with nothing good. Why did he always come to me for trouble? Fortunately, she finally coaxed him away. She was finally free. After driving away the troublemaker, she had to celebrate. She hummed a song, changed a new bottle of beer, turned on the television, and began to watch a variety show on the sofa, laughing with the host, until the door was suddenly pushed open. An old man, who was supposed to have left, came back in a hurry. She stiffened on the sofa. Sorry, I forgot to take the razor. You see, it's easy to forget things now. Russell walked out of the bathroom and noticed the scene. He was stunned for a moment, and then exclaimed, "You can simulate this perfectly? This is probably artificial intelligence, right? It's really amazing." Yes. Yangzi nodded with difficulty. Even her movements were exactly the same as yesterday, smooth but stiff. Perfectly copying the life of the producer is one of my functions. Then I'm sorry to disturb you. Russell waved goodbye and considerately closed the door for her. After a long, long time, Yangzi was still in a daze. She couldn't believe it. Did I fool him again? That was close. She drank the beer in her mouth stiffly, feeling that her frightened heart was still beating nonstop. However, she had a feeling that the guy hadn't left yet. Maybe he was waiting outside the door for her to make a mistake. No, Russell made her suspicious. She raised her head and drank the beer. She planned to go to her granddaughter's place to lie low for a while and come back later. But when she opened the door with the package, her smile stiffened. Outside the door, the visitors who had been waiting for a long time all smiled brightly. "Hello, this is the Ivory Towers Elderly Escort Group." The service staff from Donbua revealed standard smiles. They were warm and considerate. Mr. Russell has ordered a year's worth of top-notch care services for you, including cleaning, tidying up, 3 meals, and daily care. May I ask if it's convenient for you now? Can we begin? Silence. In the long silence, the old lady tilted her head and lit the cigarette at the corner of her mouth with trembling hands. She took a deep breath. The corners of her eyes glistened with tears. "Russell, damn you." Chapter 9:26. After leaving Nara, Russell was very calm, all the way just staring out of the window. Why sure knew that he wasn't feeling well, so she didn't say anything. Even if he occasionally had some excessive requests like eating eel rice in the wilderness, she would pinch her nose and help him settle it. But he could feel that under this man's calm exterior, there was a wave of sadness surging like a tide. Don't be sad. Huaisher comforted him. There are always regrets. It's nothing. I'm not sad. Russell looked up and smiled. Look at me. I'm so happy. Huaisher shook her head and sighed, no longer speaking. He didn't expect the death of his old friend to be such a big blow to him. Perhaps even someone as infuriating as Russell would have a soft spot in his heart. He stepped on the accelerator and kept moving forward. Winter is here. Russell stared at the snow outside the window and murmured, "It would be great if I could ski." In the driver's seat, Huaisher paused and didn't say anything. He turned right and went to the ski resort. Forget it. I'll just relax with him. For hours later, Russell got off the sled with satisfaction, as if he was reminiscing about the past and felt a little comforted. However, when he looked down, he still couldn't help sighing. It's so cold. It would be great if there were stones to eat. An hour later, through Weischer's identity as Hell Cooking Demon, the door of the top-quality stone cuisine in the border restaurant of Engzhou opened for the distinguished Mr. Russell. There's such good wine. Russell stood in front of the counter and paused, as if he was immersed in memories. Back then, everyone, Weischer gritted his teeth and took out his credit card. After eating and drinking, Russell finally smiled and said to Weischer gratefully, "Thank you for your hard work." "It's okay. It's no trouble." Weischer clutched his wallet and squeezed out a smile. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Then, how about we go to the hot spring together after eating?" Russell suggested, happily. "It seems a bit far. Will it trouble you?" The tatami under Weischer's feet shattered silently. "I am fine." He lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Finally, he slowly raised his head again and smiled. "What kind of hot spring do you want to soak in?" "Shurjian's hot spring seems pretty good. Hakone is also very good. It's really hard to choose. But when you mention hot springs, I'm reminded of the hot springs in the hot sea that Yanko mentioned when we were dating." Russell gazed at the night sky with an expression of yearning. "Wouldn't it be great if I could go there and take a look?" 3 hours later, Russell, who had enjoyed a full set of back-scrubbing services from his students, hummed a song as he soaked in the hot spring. She raised her wine cup and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. He sighed with emotion. "If there was a blonde beauty to soothe my heart, wouldn't that be bliss?" After saying that, he glanced at the person beside him without leaving a trace. Weischer, who was next to him, smoked and turned a deaf ear. He only raised his hand and flicked the ashes of his cigarette into Russell's pool. Russell coughed twice and said again, "If there was a beauty to soothe my heart, speaking of which, there's something strange." Weischer smoked and looked down at his phone. Suddenly, he said, "I just found out that during the day, someone suddenly booked the best escort service for a whole year at Domba's medical department. They even put my bill on it. I wonder if you have any leads?" Russell didn't seem to hear him. He just stared at the moonlight and sighed. Life is short, just like the falling cherry blossoms. Glory and splendor, 9 times a day, and a cup of wine. It's just that I don't know when I'll be able to meet my old friend. And I don't know who will be able to ease my sorrow. Boom! The alchemy bomb exploded in the hot spring. Hot steam spewed out of the broken pipe and blocked Russell's face, stabbing the latter half of his words back into his throat. The steam rose and fell like a rainstorm. Russell was still in the posture of raising his glass to invite the moon. His messy white hair was stuck to his face, and he looked very embarrassed. But when he lowered his head, he couldn't hide his sadness. He raised his hand and wiped away the tears at the corner of his mouth. The passing of an old friend made me lose my composure for a moment. "I'm sorry. Weischer, I made you laugh. Have UF Asterisk King had enough?" Weischer was furious. He pulled out his gun and pulled the trigger repeatedly at his old face. In the end, even the Lord of the Flies couldn't penetrate the old bastard's face. He thought that he was sad and wanted to comfort him. In the end, if it weren't for the message from the foot of the mountain, he might have fooled around with this old bastard until next week. "Are you human, Russell?" Weischer widened his eyes and roared, "I was so worried about you." I'm flattered." Russell seemed to be moved and smiled. He took the bullet from his face. Seeing a student care about himself, no matter who it is, they would want to immerse themselves in it. "You still have the face to say that I'm immersed in it." Weischer was so angry that he laughed. "I'll arrange a private room for you on the riverside. I'll also give you a cement bucket. I guarantee that you'll be immersed in it until the end." He didn't care about the money. Well, he did care about it. After all, he was used to being stingy. But even if he took the best sake in Ingzhou every day, it would be impossible for him to spend a drop in the ocean of Danbua's income. But the problem was that, for a moment, well, for a long time, Huaishe actually believed that this old bastard would be sad. He even really believed that old Madame Yangzi was dead. In the end, this wave was really a show of acting skills by an experienced veteran actor, making him a young idol stunned. Huaishe felt as if his heart had been smashed into pieces. These old bastards are too dramatic. I want to go back to Danbua. Why do you old bastards have so many tricks up your sleeves? He asked angrily. Can't you be more serious? Be more upright and speak properly? Russell shrugged helplessly, thought for a moment, and answered seriously, because the upright people are all dead. Why, sure. Huaishe froze in place when she heard those low words. In the sudden silence, the old man raised his hand, pushed the water droplets on his face and his disheveled white hair to the back of his head, looked up, and laughed. Isn't that the case? The upright knights, like Orton and Gerard, the inflexible old fogies like Ying Fangzhou, the determined, fearless ones like Mu Lian, those glorious, beautiful, and praiseworthy people have all passed away with the utopia. People like Woodman and Mathers, who had lost hope, fell into hell. Those who lost everything with hatred in their hearts, like Perron, went to the border. What's left? He stared at the bright moon in the sky and muttered to himself, people like me who can't even be ranked as a preparation for singing in my lifetime, an otaku like the old man who stays in the library all day, and a bystander like Tangi who has never belonged to the utopia, and a pitiful person like Yangzi who has nowhere to go. What are we? Look, why sure? He spread his arms and laughed self-deprecatingly. This is what we have to face now, an era that no longer exists, a celestial genealogy that has long been shattered. Huaishe was speechless. So, don't be disappointed. The ivory tower doesn't represent the utopia, and neither do I, because this isn't all it is, and it's not where its value lies. Russell turned around and smiled at the students behind him. If I still have any achievements worth showing to them, treasures and chips worth bragging about, it's only the illusory future. He said solemnly, you and the future you represent, being looked at like that. Huaishe couldn't help but sigh helplessly and raise his hands in surrender. All right, I admit defeat. He looked away. You old thing, you can really talk about anything. Can we not talk about this anymore? It's too awkward. Ha ha, this is the teacher's expectation for you. Why sure. Work hard. Russell got up and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry. At least I'm not lying to you. Also, he paused for a moment and said seriously, thank you for the wine. After saying that, he left the stunned Huaishe on the spot. He picked up his bath basket, hummed a vague tune, and turned to leave. After a long time, Huaishe finally reacted. Russell was really thanking him. Unbelievable. Then he noticed the exploded hot spring in front of him, the sirens in the distance, the hot spring attendant screaming in the corner, and the gun in his hand. No, let me explain. Huaishe was dumbfounded. He raised his hand and subconsciously wanted to look for Russell, only to find that the old bastard had already run away. He only felt his vision go dark. After 8 hours, on the other side of Ingzhou, Huaishe actually experienced the same sadness as old Lady Yangzi. People and people's hearts were connected. Thinking of this, Huaishe couldn't help but burst into tears. Russell, damn you. The next day, early morning, after a good sleep, Russell, with a radiant face, enjoyed the breakfast in the soup house and looked sympathetically at Huaishe across the table. You look so pale. Young people, pay attention to your body. Don't stay up late because there are still many days to stay up late in the future. Who do you think did this to? Huaisher slammed the table in grief and indignation. I came back from the police station at 4 in the morning. Do you know how awkward it was when I explained to the people in Looming Hall that I was Huaisher? Dom was Huaisher. Don't worry, no one will laugh at you. No, it should be said that the people in Looming Hall might be very surprised. Russell calmly grabbed the bowl of rice and said casually, "It's rare to see a law-abiding person like you, Huaisher. Most of the people in Ascension who do something, if they don't escape by jumping over the wall, they will violently resist the law. Those who have a little bit of status will act cool when they meet a thief. Occasionally, when they meet an honest and cooperative big shot like you, they can't wait to burn incense. Why would they use such a small thing to make things difficult for you?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and ordered breakfast for Huaisher. "Okay, after eating, get in the car and rest." "I'll drive today," Russell said. "If we take a shortcut, we should arrive at night." He put down his chopsticks and smiled. "It'll be fast this time." "Ingzhou?" Huaisher asked. "No." Russell shook his head. "Outside Ingzhou." In only half an hour, Russell drove Huaisher to the seaside. In front of the private berth at the port, waiting for them was a huge and jaw-dropping yacht. The 3-story pure white yacht was printed with the logo of the ivory tower, and the 60-meter-long hull was like a giant among the other yachts at the port. The deck was spacious enough to open a paddy, and there was even a helicopter landing pad at the end. It's 62 meters long and has a draft of 7 meters. The internal facilities are all top-notch from Silver Monument. It's powered by both Origin substance and electricity, and the monster-level engine produced by the Cavendish workshop can make it reach a speed of 90 knots. It's enough for you to leave anyone who wants to race with you in the dust. The order was placed 2 months ago, and it was just delivered the day before yesterday. I had someone drive it here. Russell walked in front and took the key from the person waiting on the shore. He played with it in his hand and turned to look at Huaisher. "How is it? How does it feel?" Seeing his ugly face flaunting his wealth, Huaisher couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Why do you have to do this kind of thing when you have a bit of money?" "It's not me." Russell raised his hand and tossed the key to him. "This belongs to you, Huaisher." Chapter 9:27. Seeing the key being thrown at him, Huaisher instinctively went to catch it. However, when he heard Russell's words, his hand trembled, and he almost dropped the key. "What is this?" He suspected that there was something wrong with his ears. "It's just a yacht, no big deal. Didn't you treat me to a drink? Just take it as a gift from me." Russell shrugged and did not say anything else. He walked towards the yacht. Only Huaisher was still standing on the shore, holding the key in shock. He lifted it up and looked at it carefully. Huaisher's first reaction was to quickly check the accounts to see if this was his money. After repeatedly confirming that he had paid in full, he felt like he was in a dream. Yacht. What did he want this for? If he sold this thing, would he be able to make a lot of money as a middleman? His face twitched. In the end, he sighed and kept the key. This was all his hard-earned money. "Okay, I've been a tool for so long. It's not bad to get a yacht." Huaisher, the country bumpkin, put his hands in his pockets and swaggered onto his own yacht. Then he remembered he did not seem to know how to drive a yacht. 10 minutes later, Huaisher started racing with the yacht next door. Of course, there were several hours of simulation training in the Book of Destiny. However, in reality, he was just holding the steering wheel on the yacht for show. What was really useful was the little white mouse, Fishball, who was dozing off on the steering seat while hugging a grain of rice. As the incarnation of Helios and the spirit of the sun chariot, it was just driving a yacht. It was as if Schumacher was riding a bicycle. It was too easy. especially when there was Osiris's main artificial intelligence, Beelzebub in the form of a scarab. These two top drivers in the world took turns to drive a yacht. It was really lucky. After driving for a while, Weischer started to feel bored. After entering the coordinates, he turned around and returned to the cabin. He saw Russell, the polar bear, lying on the sofa and watching a comedy show on the satellite television. He looked extremely happy. As a bystander, Weischer couldn't help but shed tears of sympathy for the vice principal. Don't you need to work every day? Work. What's your job? Russell turned around blankly and stuffed 2 pieces of honey cake into his mouth. I'm Bear Bear. Bear Bear doesn't work. You're already so old, yet you're still trying to act cute. Weischer rolled his eyes in disgust. Then, without a guilty conscience, he collapsed on the sofa next to him and connected to the Wi-Fi to play games. Russell looked at him from the corner of his eyes. You're the chairman of a large corporation. Don't you need to work? Work. Weischer asked blankly. I'm just a passing calamity musician. I practice for 2 hours every day. I don't know what you're talking about. The master and disciple looked at each other and couldn't help but appreciate each other. They all had the same hateful face. Then, in the Pacific Ocean, the happy fishing time began. On the vast ocean, there were no restaurants to eat. Weischer ate lunch and dinner by himself with the ingredients in the fridge. Although there was a little too much seasoning in Russell's portion, he still ate happily after throwing the plates into the dishwasher. Weischer looked out the window at the vast ocean in the night and still didn't quite understand. Where are we going? At the bottom of the sea, the secret base of the Utopia. Secret base? Russell looked at him from the corner of his eyes. When the Utopia was still around, we always did things openly. There were a total of 16 offices in the earth, the border, and hell. Every place was private territory, 50,000 meters above our heads, all the way to space, and 30,000 miles below our feet, all the way to the core of the earth. It was all our land. Why would we need a secret base? These are all tricks that the Continuation Academy and the General Administration like to play. But there's nothing on the ocean at all. Weischer looked at the coordinates on the map on his phone. It was completely empty. Otakus wouldn't put a welcome sign on their door. That guy can't wait for others to not come and disturb him. The so-called autistic child is referring to that kind of guy. Russell flicked the cigar ash in disdain, not caring that it affected the taste at all. Back then, that guy never dared to look people in the eyes when he talked. He was always talking to himself and couldn't communicate at all. He didn't want to talk to others either. These years, it's been as he wished. His territory isn't even on the General Administration's map. He occupies an island, and he has no idea how happy he is to play alone. There's such a person in the Utopia. Weischer was speechless. Once again, he felt that the world was full of wonders. Why were the surviving elders of the Utopia all so strange? There was the old lady who was a drama queen, and now there was an autistic otaku. After looking around, he could only say that Russell was indeed the pillar of the Utopia. He stood out among them. In comparison, he was simply the most reliable. If possible, I don't want to deal with that guy either. Russell sighed with a headache. It's still possible to communicate with people like Yangtze, but that guy is completely useless. He just ignores everything you say. No matter how many times you try to persuade him, he won't budge at all. Because of this, many people had a very tense relationship with him back then. Everyone was very unhappy at one point. In the end, he simply resigned and left. He was lucky enough to avoid a disaster. In the end, because of this, he became even more autistic. It's really a headache. He shook his head helplessly and thought for a long time before saying, it's like those otakus who finally got out of the house to participate in work. You know, right? They don't get along well with their colleagues and make no progress in their work. In the end, after they resigned, their only friends died, and they instantly became alone again. It would be great if Killian was still around, but that guy also died of serious injuries. The few people in the world who could talk to him are all gone. Weisher was silent for a long time before sighing softly. It sounds really lonely. Lonely? That guy doesn't care. Give him a notebook and a pen, and he can play the prime number game for a whole year. Russell got up. Get ready to be kicked out. Weisher, our two bad guests, are coming. At this moment, above the Pacific Ocean, in the vast sea, a thick fog suddenly rose. In the thick white fog, a distant outline slowly emerged. It was like an island, but it had an altitude, an outline that an island couldn't compare to. It was like 8-ball? Weisher looked up and was dumbfounded. A huge stone ball actually appeared out of thin air above this empty Pacific Ocean. It seemed to cover the entire island and the surrounding territory. It was tightly sealed, and not a single gap was allowed to leak out, allowing the sea to surge. It was physically isolated from the outside world. Weisher couldn't help but feel ashamed to be able to stay at home to such an extent. Wasn't this too autistic? When the yacht approached, Weisher felt the size of the stone ball more and more. It was like covering the sky and the sun. It was probably as big as an entire city. He reached out and knocked on the dark stone in front of him, only to find that these stones looked like natural obsidian. They were flawless, and there were many changes hidden inside that Weisher couldn't understand. Don't use brute force, or you'll be paid back double. You still need to understand how autistic that guy is. Russell raised his head and looked at the dark stone in front of him. After all, he's the creator. In an instant, Weisher went numb. He quietly put away the sword he took out and pretended that nothing had happened. He was extremely obedient. He completely extinguished the thought of trying it out. This was the creator, a big boss who had activated God mode in his own territory. If he tried it out, he might really die. What's next? Weisher asked in a low voice. We have to tell him that we're here, right? He already knew, long before we entered this fog. Russell shrugged. It's just that he pretends not to know. He can't be bothered with us, and he doesn't want us to appear in front of him. If we use force, he'll definitely find an opportunity to completely drive us away. That's how that guy is. He doesn't even take the initiative to drive people away. He didn't care that his words would be heard by the creator at all. Russell didn't hide his evaluation at all. But the stone ball still didn't respond. It was silent and turned a deaf ear to them, as if they didn't exist. It looked like it didn't care about them and didn't care about them. It was so cold that they didn't know where to start. What should we do? Weisher was at a loss. Isn't that simple? Russell said matter-of-factly, when facing the ice in a partner's heart, naturally, we have to use warm friendship and love to melt it. Only then can we establish a bond and a connection. Weisher, you have to read more shonen comics. You can learn a lot of useful things. Weisher's eyes almost rolled back 360 degrees. I don't believe you. Why don't you try to reform one for me? Weisher sneered. What's the hurry? Russell flicked the cigar ash and said calmly, Why do you think I installed 16 extra speakers on your boat? As he said that, he took out a remote control from his pocket. He pressed it. In an instant, the deck flipped and 16 super-large speakers appeared out of thin air. Weisher subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Before mastery took effect, he raised his hand and covered his ears. Then, in the next second, a wave of air swept across. The entire sea area caused continuous turbulence and ripples before the terrifying noise of the speakers. At this moment, The entire yacht seemed to have turned into a huge speaker, facing the stone ball in front of it, and began to broadcast the campus in a passionate tone. Student Udana Raman Sharma of Republic Phase 3, Group 6. Your good friend Russell has brought his student, Huaishur, to visit you. Open the door. Open the door. I know you're at home. Other than that, there was also the irregular sound of an electric drill, the brain-boiling sound of an air conditioner, and the rhythm of a square dance of a country ballad. It was like a terrorist attack that dropped a bomb of sound. In the end, it turned into Russell's karaoke singing and dancing from ancient jazz to pop songs, rock, heavy metal, and even folk songs. The high-pitched sound echoed between the sea and the sky, and the crazy volume that was enough to shake the brains of ordinary people out reverberated and spread all the time, tormenting Huaishur's ears. However, the stone ball did not respond. Huaishur shouted at Russell with difficulty, but Russell calmly smoked his cigar, indicating for him to calm down. Then, Huaishur saw that this old bastard had even prepared earplugs in advance. In the end, he did not get one. He was so angry. Just like that, the noisy loudspeakers continued to call out to their cold old friend with a deafening sound. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, 5 hours passed, 10 hours passed. In the end, Huaishur felt that he had gone deaf. Just like that, 24 hours passed, a whole 24 hours. It was not until the stone ball shook crazily that a gap finally appeared. An angry voice roared, "Enough! Shut up!" However, on the deck, the deaf Huaishur could not hear anything at all. He was still playing cards with Russell, who was wearing earplugs. Then, in midair, a wisp of pure, white water vapor condensed out of thin air. Like catkins, it drifted towards the vast ocean below. At that moment, Huaishur subconsciously raised his head. Staring at the almost invisible wisp of frost, he only felt a premonition of death burst forth. Chapter 9:28. It's the last day of double monthly votes. Please get monthly votes. A line of bleak white slowly slid down. Just like a beautiful line slowly extending in the air, it fell to where they were like dancing steps. In that instant, the deafening noises and countless chaotic vibrations,
It was
as if the transparency
disappeared.
of two
It
images
was
had been
as if the
lowered
shield button had
and
been
superimposed
pressed,
together,
and the world was
presenting
silent.
a strange picture
Huaishur was pressed
that was
to the deck
completely
by an
opposite
invisible
yet
force,
integrated
unable
into
to
one.
move.
He
Huaishur
tried hard to
fell
lift
into
his eyes,
confusion,
but
it
could
was
only
incomprehensible.
see a dense white
This
light.
was his first time
But
witnessing
Russell
Russell
was
in action.
oblivious,
But he had
his
no
head was
idea
still
what was
lowered,
going on.
and he
Was it the
casually
cards
threw out the
or
card in his
the
hand.
world that was spinning?
The card flew out
Where
from
was
between
the
his
boundary
index
between
and middle
reality
fingers,
and illusion?
circling and
Was
flipping
it them
in the frozen
or
air.
that wisp of
It was
white
as
mist
light as a bird,
that was illusory?
as if it had
Was that
unfolded
card
an
the king of
invisible pair of
spades,
wings,
or the ace of
causing the
hearts?
world to turn
The
upside
magic time
down.
is over.
Huaishur was
Huaishur,
suddenly in a trance.
Russell slowly raised
only
his
feeling
hand,
that the world
flipped
was
the
spinning.
card that had fallen
It
to
was
the ground,
as if the
and
card
covered
was
it
still
back on the
suspended
pile
in
of
the air
cards,
and had never
hiding the
moved at
truth
all in the darkness.
What was spinning
He
and
smiled
dancing was not
meaningfully.
this white paper
It's
printed
enough
with
to be a
ink,
qualified
but the whole
spectator.
world.
There's
The
no
world
need
was
to delve
turned
into
upside down,
principles,
right?
And the four directions
Thus,
were in chaos.
all the illusions
It was
quickly
not until the
blurred.
card
The
fell
frozen world
silently into the
disappeared,
pile of
and the
cards
sound
that
of the
tide
turbulent
rang out.
world returned
Everything
to
was
silence.
Nothing
King of
happened.
spades. But
Russell
the door
said,
finally
"I
opened.
won."
Russell
Huaishur
stood up from the deck.
Why are you still
and
talking
patted
about
the
this
dust off
at
his
a time
body.
like this?
He stretched his
Huaishur
stiff
found
body
it hard to
and
understand
cheerfully
what this
raised
old
his head
guy
to
was
ask,
talking about.
"What's the matter?"
Moreover,
He
he
had
raised his
seen
head and
clearly
asked,
just now
"Long time no
that
see,
Russell had
Sharma.
thrown out a red ace.
How have you been?"
But now,
No
after
one
the dust
responded,
had settled,
but
the
Russell
card in
was
front
not
of
anxious.
Huaishur had
He just
also
waited
changed.
quietly.
It was
as if everything
he had
that had
enough
just
patience to
happened
wait
was just
until the end
an
of time.
illusion. Russell
After a
smiled
long silence,
and spread out
a
his hands.
muffled voice came
just
from the
like
stone
a magician
ball.
who had finished his
An
performance.
annoying old ghost
He
came to
showed
my
off
door
his
without
deception.
an appointment,
Then,
and made 24
Huaishur
hours
saw
of
that the
noise,
line of
disturbing
frost
my
falling
research
from the sky,
exhausting my
finally
patience,
arrived.
and
It fell
squandering
from the
the
last
sky
bit of goodwill
like a phantom
I had for him,
penetrating their
and now
bodies
he
and the
actually
deck
has the
under their
cheek to
feet.
ask and was
if I'm
still
doing
going
well?
straight down.
How strange.
It was not until the
Russell,
moment it touched
how can
the
there be
sea
such a
that
shameless
an
bastard in this
ear-piercing
world?
roar
Have
burst
you
out of
really
thin
cared
air.
about
Then
whether
the
others are
terrifying
doing
white
well
waves
or
swept
not?
and
If
spread
there's
in all
really
directions.
nothing wrong with your brain,
the cold
then
wind
let me tell
howled
you,
and
I'm
shrouded
not
everything
doing well.
within, and the
Sharma
resounding
asked
sound of the
coldly,
iceberg
"Can you get
growing
lost
could be
now?"
heard incessantly.
I'm doing well.
The turbulent
Russell
sea
spread his arms
surface froze
comfortably.
in an instant.
If I remember
and
correctly,
the low temperature
after so many
continued
years,
to spread downward,
including before
all
you
the
left
way
the
to the
Republic,
bottom of the
this
sea.
is the longest
At the same
sentence
time,
you've said
it
to me.
spread upward.
He took a deep
freezing
breath
the moisture
and exclaimed,
in the air,
"You're
forming
really
a deadly
flattering
white
me."
mist tornado.
Why, sure.
A few
Who
seconds
was
ago,
beside him,
a creator
moved
had planted
away
a frozen
little
seed
in
here.
disdain.
And a few seconds
Does this
later,
guy really
a
have
towering
no
tree had risen from the
self-awareness of how
ground,
annoying he
turning
is?
into a pale pillar
Then
that was half
Russell
gaseous
really did not
and half
treat him
solid,
as an
separated
outsider
by
at
the
all.
sea surface,
Like an annoying
all
relative
of this really happened,
who refreshed
but at the
outside
same
the house
time,
during the holidays.
It also seemed
he
like
showed
it didn't
a warm
happen
smile
because the two
Since you're
realities
already here,
overlapped. At
why
the
don't
same
you have a
time.
meal before you leave? Sharma did not say anything. He was angry, miserable. Huaishur could not help but cover his face. It was as if he saw an autistic otaku's face gradually turn red under the glib tongue of a salesperson. Bro, don't you even know how to curse? Big brother, say something. As long as you say something, I can scold them for you. Starting from, there must be a wise discussion between two armies, I can scold them all the way until you give me a 5-star rating. I won't even take a breather. Don't worry, it'll only be a while. Russell sincerely promised, I'll leave after eating. I won't disturb you. How about that? I swear. Just like every dogman who sent a girl to her house with bad intentions, Russell's expression was extremely sacred and solemn, without any trace of weirdness or indecency. Only Huaishur rolled his eyes up to the stratosphere. Like how I believe you. Then he realized Sharma seemed to really believe him. Looking at the crack on the stone ball, Huaishur's jaw dropped to the ground, as if he had seen a ghost. Bro, don't listen to this old thing's nonsense. Nothing good will come out of him entering your house. Why? Why did you let a wolf into your house? With sympathy and regret, Huaishur could not help but punch his fist and shake his head vigorously behind him. He followed. After passing through a long corridor and a series of thick doors, Russell actually managed to enter the interior of the stone orb as he wished after going through several erasure attempts and scanning for unknown purposes. Huaishur was hanging behind him. The moment he entered, he discovered that the huge stone ball was actually transparent from the inside. The pitch-black membrane had disappeared without a trace. Everything in front of him was no different from an ordinary island. It was the same yellow sand, seawater, reefs, and even a dense forest. The only difference was that the color of the forest was a little strange. It was no different from other places. Then he felt breathless, as if he had jumped into a closed box. There was a trace of rancid smell in the air, with little oxygen. It was similar to a refrigerator that had been left unattended for half a month after the power was cut off. He subconsciously raised his head, but before he could sneeze, he felt a layer of plastic membrane-like things sealing in front of his mouth and nose. Be careful. Sharma warned indifferently, don't touch everywhere, and don't leave any bacteria that don't belong to the local area. It's best not to touch anything, especially not to leave any excrement. Huaishur was dumbfounded. His face twitched for a while. Speak more if you can. How did a sneeze turn into someone defecating on the ground? However, he was living under someone else's roof. He was the creator. Wasn't it normal for him to have a strange temper? He shook his head and took out a gas mask from his saddlebag. He put it on his face and did not dare to say anything. He could only secretly count the favorability points. 1. You're still doing that research? How many years has it been? Russell looked around. You can really keep your composure. Sharma did not answer. A small path appeared under their feet, leading them across the seawater and into the deepest part of the island through the air. There was a layer of transparent membrane
around the path. It was like a sealed corridor, as if it was afraid that they would take something back. Just as they were silently moving forward, Huaishur heard a vague cry. A black shadow suddenly flew over their heads. When Huaishur raised his head, he saw the silhouette in the distance. "What is that?" Huaishur frowned. "Why does it look like pterodactyl, right?" Russell walked in front and did not stop. He just pointed below, indicating for him to observe carefully. Then, Huaishur saw countless swaying shadows in the lush forest. Those silhouettes that could only be seen in archaeological documentaries, strange birds rising and falling, and even trilobites crawling on the beach from the seawater. A velociraptor suddenly rushed out from the dense thorns and bit off the saber-toothed tiger's neck. It dragged the corpse and disappeared into the darkness. And in the strange seawater, the silhouette of a colossal creature slowly rose. This colossal creature from ancient times swayed its body and gracefully swept across the surface of the sea. Huaishur could not help but stop in her tracks and watch attentively. "Jurassic Park," Huaishur exclaimed. "It can actually be realized." "Ha! If that's the case, why would it be worth the creator's time?" Russell looked back and reminded softly, "This place is completely isolated from the outside world." "Huaishur, haven't you realized it yet?" Huaishur only felt a buzz in his head. When he looked around the world in the stone sphere again, he finally discovered the essence hidden under the exaggerated appearance. The entire interior of the stone sphere, the entire area in front of him, was a giant ecological bottle, an independent, isolated world that was completely different from the outside world. It was almost no different from a different world. It was like sealing moss and water in a flask to test the limit of the life inside. Since the birth of ecological science, countless scholars had failed repeatedly trying to create a complete ecological circle from nothing with their own strength. They did not hesitate to spend countless funds, efforts, and time to try to challenge the authority of the creator. However, without exception, they all met with tragic failure. But now, an independent world that was infinitely close to completion had appeared in front of Huaishur. What was this? Should he admire this magnificent power that belonged to the creator, or should he be in awe of the degree of autistic otaku? Ordinary otaku shut themselves in at home. At most, they would make figurines, put together models, or make fish tanks or hamster huts. In the end, someone was able to create a closed world, and on the basis of ensuring a closed cycle, it made the life inside transform in reverse, returning to the primitive era known as the Jurassic period in the life theory. Was this the ultimate form of otaku? The ultimate power of autistic isolation? Chapter 929. In the end, Sharma actually endured it and ignored him. When they reached the top of the mountain, a reception area like an isolation room had already been set up on a bare flat ground, with an invisible wall sealing the inside, and outside, the BSL 6-level biological protection was enough to block any level of chemical pollution. It was just short of 2 showers to welcome guests like Russell to take a bath. In front of them, the table was already piled with delicacies. Here, it specifically referred to unlimited instant noodles, cola, self-heating meals from the Astronomical Society, and compressed biscuits. Fat otaku buffet. Eat as much as you want, don't worry. Eat your fill. Huaishur looked at the table full of food, speechless. "You're only giving instant noodles. Why don't you give us some water? Otherwise, are you going to let people crush it and eat it dry?" Moreover, Sharma had no intention of showing up at all. He didn't intend to show his true face. There was only a stone sculpture covered in moss behind the table, motionless, resting his chin on his hand, looking like a statue of a contemplator. The indifferent middle-aged man's face was full of exotic charm. He had curly hair and a high nose bridge.
He wore a petrified headscarf with an unusually elegant texture. It was decorated with layers of gold ornaments and an egg-sized ruby. Even the stone sculpture's eyes were lowered, looking at the table, not intending to look at the visitors at all. "You can start eating." The stone sculpture's lips didn't move, but a cold voice was heard. "Half an hour. Finish eating and leave." "Why so long?" 15 minutes will be enough." Russell didn't care at all. He sat down happily and patted Huaishur on the shoulder. "Hurry up and eat. Huaishur, why aren't you eating? It's rare for a senior to treat you." As he spoke, he divided half of the food on the table. The corners of Huaishur's eyes twitched, and he had no appetite. What a joke! He was no longer the boy who could be satisfied with boiled noodles. No matter what, he was still a cooking demon from hell. Wouldn't it be delicious to roast anything he caught outside? But he didn't dare. After all, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be the one on the grill. He could only endure. "I'll eat later, when I get out." Russell, on the other hand, had already rolled up his sleeves and opened a pack of self-heating dry food from the Astronomy Society. He began to chew on the slices of vegetables inside before the flatbread, and stew heated up. Crunching sounds could be heard, and it seemed to whet one's appetite. Moreover, he even took out his phone, intending to watch a video to eat. "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi? Why can't I find it? I don't have that kind of thing here." Sharma coldly refused. "I'm not interested in what's happening outside." Hiss! Huaishur sucked in several breaths of cold air and couldn't stop at all. He fell into a state of shock. Russell thought for a while and sighed from the bottom of his heart. My students witnessed the whole process with their own eyes. That guy's fighting posture was really impassioned, not inferior to back then at all. Even if it was just listening to someone else's retelling, it made my old bones boil with blood. Unfortunately, that guy didn't learn to accept other people's opinions in the end. He wasn't willing to be a little tactful, but he didn't take a step back either. He was still rigid. I really don't know whether to admire or feel helpless. The stone statue was unmoved. It didn't even want to listen anymore. What does this have to do with me? I just want to hear your opinion. Russell shrugged. After all, you're the one who knows him the best among all of us. I don't have any opinion for you. Sharma said, you should go, Russell. Keep your promise and never come back. Okay, then goodbye. Russell waved his hand coolly and took a step back, but left a piece of paper on the table. There's still a long time. If you change your mind, feel free to contact me. Sharma didn't say anything else. The stone statue returned to silence. When Huaishur followed Russell out of the stone sphere, and the gap of the door closed behind them, he finally couldn't hold back his doubts. You're leaving just like that? He asked. What else? Russell asked back. That's an invincible creator in his own domain. If I can't persuade him, I can't beat him and bring him back, right? Moreover, a long-term cooperative relationship is like a relationship. What's important is that both parties are willing. Pestering won't end well. Huaishur only wanted to laugh coldly when he heard this. After being tricked so many times, there must be something wrong with his brain to believe a single word from him. He said decisively, You must have done something. Chapter 9:30. Cause trouble? Don't talk nonsense. I'm just reminiscing about the past with an old friend who's been living alone for a long time. Russell tilted his head and lit a cigar. He suddenly asked, Huaishur, when was your happiest time in the past? Huaishur answered without hesitation, when it's time to make money. Huh, you're really straightforward. Russell was amused. Other than that, it's not this kind of temporary peace that lets the panic temporarily leave, but the time when you're sentimental from the bottom of your heart and can't bear to let it go. When was it?
Huaisher thought for a moment, lowered his head, and looked at the instrument that was frozen in amber on his wrist. It's probably when I was playing the cello. He sighed softly. When I first learned to play the cello, I didn't know anything, but I instinctively liked it. In the sound of the cello, all listeners can be very satisfied and feel happy. I didn't lose anything. Even after becoming an ascended one and being able to enjoy and scrupulously, nothing can compare to this feeling. But you didn't have a good life in the past. That's right. Huaisher nodded. No matter how difficult a life is, there will always be light, right? Russell smiled and stared at the gradually setting sun in the distance. Everyone has it, and Sharma is the same. Huaisher glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and looked at his happy smile as if he was looking at the beautiful past. He only felt that this old man was really sick. You were clearly thinking of ways to make things difficult for him just now, okay? Before you left, you even used your old enemy, Ing Fangzhou, to embarrass him. No matter how you look at it, it's revenge. This isn't contradictory. Why, sure. Russell turned back with a happy expression. It should be said that this is the most amazing part. The happiest time in Sharma's life was spent with the person he hated the most. What? Huaisher was dumbfounded. If there's anyone in this world who can truly understand Ing Fangzhou, it should be him, right? Russell turned around and stared at the stone ball that was gradually disappearing into the distance. He muttered softly, "After all, other than Ing Fangzhou, no one else can drag him out of his shell. In short, they were mortal enemies, right? Scholars who closed themselves off to the point of not listening to any persuasion, and ascendants who were too proud and rigid to listen to any suggestions. Sharma, a scholar from India, and Ing Fangzhou, an ascender from East Xia, had completely different strengths and weaknesses. They had never been teammates on the same channel. As early as the first moment they met, they had already determined that the other party was a person who would never get along with them. Whether it was rationality or instinct, they all coincidentally blacklisted the other party. If possible, he didn't want to stay in the same room with her for even a second. In truth, both sides had never concealed their dislike and disgust for each other, but that did not stop them from cooperating closely without any gaps during their exploration of the abyss. Above personal likes and dislikes were missions and work, and hidden under the dispute was the recognition that even they themselves would not admit. If they wanted to realize their own value, if they wanted to fulfill their own ideals, then they had to rely on the other party's existence. No one else could achieve the results that the other party could bring. It was not an exaggeration to say that such an efficient and awkward combination was using each other. They were not sworn brothers, but partners who tried their best to endure and restrain each other. But other than that, there must be something else. If the other party was no longer around, he would definitely be lonely. When Russell left and returned to the silent stone ball, all the isolation measures prepared for outsiders disappeared. But the stone statue remained in the same place, silent, until a phantom that did not belong here appeared. He sighed helplessly. Looks like it's not the right time to visit. Even at this time, I collided with that bastard Russell. Woodman from Golden Dawn shook his head and seemed to pity him. Even now, you still haven't given up on your dream of rebuilding heaven, as expected of you. Russell, as he spoke, he turned around and asked, "Since you rejected him, what do you think about our proposal?" "I won't even consider it." The stone statue remained motionless. I said, "I'm not interested. You should go." Then, "Sorry for disturbing you this time." Woodman responded with a smile and did not pester him. He just lifted the brim of his hat and politely said goodbye. But before he left, his footsteps paused. He sighed silently. "Sharma, I know how much you hate the outside world, and how much you hate those who keep disappointing you. But no matter how prosperous and lasting the world inside, is, it doesn't have any value or meaning. You should make a choice, he said, not between the remnants of the Republic and the rebels of Golden Dawn, but between the inside and the outside, between the puppets who will never let you down and the others who will hurt you. Woodman, I've already made a choice. The creator in the ecological bottle opened the door to leave and told him bluntly, the world inside is very good. Please don't disturb me anymore. If that's the case, why do you still want to see Russell and me? Woodman turned around, took one last look at him, and asked softly, will there really be no regrets in the world inside? The stone statue did not answer. Woodman's phantom had silently dissipated, like a ghost evaporating under the sun, disappearing without a trace. In the long silence, the huge ecological bottle closed again. Everything returned to order. Countless laws operated in accordance with the will of the Creator, slowly making up for the damage and hidden dangers caused by the outsiders, readjusting the operation of the wind, rain, and tides, and revising the established history of the future. In this way, the yearning extended from the present until it was ensured that thousands of years later, tens of thousands of years later, it would endlessly move closer to the non-existent eternity. There would be no accidents, and there would be no unreasonable abnormalities. It was perfect and harmonious. From the beginning to the end, Sharma did not make any other movements. A breeze blew from afar, rolling up the business card left by Russell on the table and landing in front of him, along with the invitation of Golden Dawn. There was no need for any movement. With just a thought from Sharma, the two pieces of paper without any strange properties would begin to decompose from matter, from pulp to elements and dust, and then disappear without a trace. But for a long time, the two pieces of paper did not change at all. Will there be any regrets in the world inside? Sharma? I don't know, Sharma replied softly. But he died, so contentedly, that it makes me sad. The disgusting face appeared in front of him, with a fearless smile that was no different from the past, and the Creator closed his eyes sadly. Because I have nothing to gain. The next day, after a night of sailing, Huaishur and the others had already landed and arrived at the Hawaiian Islands, a colony of Rome in the vast Pacific Ocean. The largest children's paradise in the Pacific Ocean. In the past, due to the political competition and power seesaw between Rome and the Americas, Hawaii had become a rather peculiar place. Due to its loose legal system, it had become the world's largest offshore company registration place, and the tax system was even more relaxed to attract more funds. At the same time, while vigorously developing tourism, the education industry was also quite prosperous. The Ivy League had set up all kinds of training facilities here and used this place as a training pilot for their ascendants. With the selling point of gifted children's education and relying on the local legal conditions, they had set up mathematics, physics, and logic classes that did not have age restrictions to search for talented new blood. There were even driving and shooting courses for ordinary people in cars, speedboats, and helicopters, as well as extreme sports courses such as parachuting, skiing, wingsuit flying, and so on. There were no age restrictions and no restrictions on the subjects. You could pay on the same day, start learning on the same day, and graduate in 10 days at the earliest. As long as there was money, even an 8-year-old child could come here and learn amazing skills after a few months of training. Unfortunately, Huaishur and the others did not come here to inspect their peers. You know me? Chapter 931. It's really you. I thought I got the wrong person. The middle-aged man couldn't help but smile in surprise. He was stunned for a long time, and then he let out a long breath as if relieved of a heavy burden. Hello, Owen Carter. Just call me Owen. He introduced himself excitedly, picked up the big bag he bought from the supermarket, and opened the door. Please come in. The house is a little messy. Please don't mind it. 10 minutes later,
Weisher and Russell were sitting in the slightly messy but warmly decorated living room. Faint steam rose from the teacup in their hands. There was also a dog running around in the living room. In the end, it snuggled into Weisher's arms and asked for a pet. Weisher hugged it and rubbed the dog's head. They looked around. There were bookshelves everywhere, filled with all kinds of information. There was also a huge table full of drawings. There were all kinds of strange creatures and buildings drawn on them, as well as some young and cute children. There were also all kinds of picture books and fairy tales in the display cabinet. It looked like a painter's studio. And in the utility room, there was the sound of rummaging. After a long time, Owen wiped the sweat on his forehead. His face and arms were covered with dust. He came back with a huge box with some difficulty. He placed it in front of them. I finally found it. He breathed a sigh of relief and sat down. My father left a will before he died. He said that one day, if Mr. Russell in the photo came to visit, I should give this to him. He took out an old photo frame and compared it with Russell in front of him. He sighed. I didn't expect that after so many years, you really haven't changed at all. It's not surprising that people will stagnate and change when they get old. Russell slowly put down the teacup and looked at the iron box in front of him. That guy is really whimsical, as always. But didn't you suspect such a ridiculous will? Owen shook his head. Most of my father's arrangements have his reasons. Besides, since it's a will as a son, I have nothing to say. Next to him, Weisher was holding the dog and looking curiously at the furnishings in the living room. He observed the exquisite fairy tale picture books. Did you draw all these? Yes. Owen nodded, a little embarrassed. I'm now an illustrator who contributes to magazines and advertisements. Occasionally, I'll produce some picture books to make a living. If you like them, I'll give you 2 later. That's great. Weisher nodded. I happen to be worried about what gift to bring for my students. Can I trouble you to sign a few more books? Of course, that's not a problem. However, students... Owen was puzzled. We work in an educational institution. Mr. Weisher has recently become my assistant. Russell explained calmly. Your father, didn't tell you about this. Owen shook his head. His father seemed to have never told his child about the world of the ascended. Under Russell's probing, he quickly discovered that his father knew nothing about it. Perhaps this was the protection that the father had left behind for his child. To ordinary people, the world of ascenders was not necessarily beautiful. He actually didn't tell you about his previous job. Russell said, Mr. Carter used to be our best white dove. Well, you can think of him as a member of the Research Institute. Before he retired, he once went deep into the wilderness alone for us and collected many precious samples and data. He made outstanding contributions. Oh, like an explorer? Owen's eyes lit up. He never told me about this. When I was young, I used to fantasize that he was an assassin who hid his identity or a ruthless character in some dark organization. Now that I think about it, it doesn't match my father. He had his difficulties. Russell said, It's not good to tell a child about the hard life of living in the open. Besides, he sacrificed a lot for this. I can more or less guess. Owen nodded and sighed. Someone like him, who is too serious about himself, would definitely not let his life be empty. As for why he didn't tell us, he must have his reasons. However, he was very satisfied when he died. That lack of regret made me envious. So, I think he must have done a very valuable job, right? For example, saving the world or something. After saying that, Owen was amused by his ridiculous imagination. He shook his head and did not say anything else. He only pushed the dusty box over. No matter what,
I believe that my father has completed his mission. Thank you for coming and allowing me to see his value once again," he said solemnly to the guest in front of him. "Now, I'll give you his last legacy, Mr. Russell. I only hope that my father's legacy can be of some help to you." Russell lowered his head and stared at the dusty box and the password lock that had never been touched. "Aren't you curious about what's inside?" he suddenly asked. "You've never opened it?" Owen was stunned. He fell silent. He seemed to be struggling between curiosity and some kind of persistence. After a long time, he shook his head. "Before my father left, he told me that if I wanted to abandon my current life one day, I could open it. But I think my current life is good, and there's no need to change anything. So, forget it." He took a deep look at the iron box that had accompanied him for many years and looked away without any pity. "Anyway, it's not mine anymore. Let me maintain a mysterious fantasy." Luo Su nodded and didn't say anything else. Before leaving, he begged the two to sit down and drew 2 sketches for himself. In the sketches, Russell was a dignified and cold old man, holding a scepter in his hand and looking awe-inspiring. Huaishur, on the other hand, was a travel-worn wanderer, but she had a smug smile on her face as if she owned the entire world. Was it his imagination and processing as a painter, or had he accurately grasped something with his intuition? It was really hard to understand. After finishing the sketches, Owen was also shocked by his results. He asked excitedly, "If possible, can I use them in the picture book?" "This is your work." "Of course, it's as you wish." Russell carried the box and finally said, "If you need any help, please call this number at any time. I owe you and your father a big favor." He handed over a business card. "Trust me, I can do most of the things you need." "I will." Owen took the business card seriously and put it in his pocket. He didn't doubt Russell's promise, but he didn't seem to care about the promise that was worth a lot. "Just in time. It's time for me to pick up my daughter from school." He picked up the car key, full of expectation and joy. "Thank you for your visit today. It seems that I have a new bedtime story to tell her tonight. Grandpa's legendary story. She'll listen to it." Russell was stunned for a moment and sighed helplessly. "I really hope that I can have a positive role in it. It would be better if I could live to the end of the story. I'll try my best to arrange it." Owen promised with a smile. Just like that, after saying goodbye to the two of them, he drove away. After a long time, Huaishur looked away. "You're envious, aren't you?" Russell sighed. "There's nothing better than having a descendant who's willing to live a normal life, watching him get married and have a family, and finally die with no regrets. I'm afraid people like us will never have such a wonderful life. Isn't it good now?" Huaishur shrugged. "Although that kind of life is enviable, I don't think there's anything bad about my life." "That's right. Other than not being able to have a stable relationship, there's nothing bad about it." Russell looked deeply at Huaishur, hinting at something. Huaishur suddenly choked and was speechless. After returning to the car, he looked at the heavy box in Russell's hand and asked curiously, "Can you tell me what's inside? What's there to hide?" Russell slowly fiddled with the combination lock and asked, "Do you remember what White Dove does?" I remember Raymond told me that they're all elite researchers of the Ivory Tower." Huaishur was a little uncertain. "More or less. They're all explorers of the original kingdom of heaven." Russell sighed. White Dove, Red Deer, Gray Stork, and Black Whale are all honorific titles for outstanding explorers. Only researchers who have made great contributions to their own fields can get such titles. Red Deer is a wandering merchant who patrols hell. Gray Stork is a lurker who goes deep into hell, and Black Whale can only be obtained by a group leader in hell. As for White Dove, they're the most elite explorers of hell. They're the researchers and combat units who fight on the front line. The stranded or passing passengers had been cleared out as early as 3 hours ago when Russell and the others boarded the plane. At this moment, in the huge Las Vegas airport, there were only 2 people waiting for their arrival. "Welcome, Mr. Russell, Mr. Weischer." The white-haired old man held his cane and took the lead to walk forward. He nodded and saluted. "Your arrival brings light to this humble city." Russell shrugged and looked at Weischer. "See, I told you, it's their good fortune to be here. Why are you being so polite?" The corner of Weischer's eyes twitched. It was the first time he had seen such a shameless guy. But the old man seemed to fall for this trick, and his attitude became more and more respectful. "Would you like to stay in a hotel first? We have prepared rooms for you in the Star of the Empire." "I'm a little hungry. Let's eat first." Russell casually threw the luggage into his arms. "No problem." The old man picked up the luggage himself and followed behind him. "The 6 3-star chef demons are ready to satisfy all your appetites at any time." "How considerate." Russell laughed. "I feel like I'm just missing 2 beautiful girls to feed me." The old man's expression didn't change. "If you need it, I'll arrange it immediately. Then arrange for a few beautiful girls to eat for me." Russell nodded, not knowing whether he was joking or serious. "I hope they can be happier." "No problem." The old man asked, "Do you have any requirements for the ladies to eat? Skin color or anything else?" "Any wish can be satisfied," Russell praised. "You're really like Santa Claus." In front of Mr. Russell, how could I dare to take advantage of my seniority? The old man bowed his head. "You are our distinguished guest. This is my duty." "See, why sure, this is called professionalism." Russell said happily to the young man behind him, "Will satisfy all your needs and make you feel at home." Even if you say to him, "Sorry, we plan to burn this city to ashes," he'll tell you, "Sorry, that will have to wait for 2 hours because we don't have enough gasoline." "Then do you want to burn it?" Weischer carried his luggage and walked casually behind, ignoring the attentions of the waiter. He had already noticed some kind of strange aura hidden behind this seemingly warm and harmonious atmosphere. He was too lazy to look at everything that dazzled him. Of course not. Why, sure. Russell enjoyed this overly enthusiastic service with a clear conscience. His footsteps were brisk. "We're not destructive maniacs. Why should we burst such a beautiful soap bubble?" He stared at the city in the distance and whistled. "It's a miracle that the bubble can exist for so long. It's not beautiful to insist on the reality. It's better to let it remain as it is. Anyway, it has nothing to do with us, right?" Outside the airport, the luxury car that had been waiting for them for a long time had already opened its door to them. "This place didn't exist," he said slowly. "After the collapse of the utopia, in the chaos, everyone couldn't even take care of themselves. Therefore, some people came up with the idea of embezzling." "Embezzling? Embezzling?" Weischer was stunned. "That's right. In the early years, there was a batch of strategic reserves of the utopia here. Although it can't be compared to our sunken old campus, it's actually a very important material reserve point. Then, after some of the keepers heard about the collapse of the utopia, they decided to make more effective use of this wealth." Russell smiled mockingly. "So, after a few procedures, the utopia's strategic reserves appeared openly in the black market. After obtaining a large amount of wealth, they didn't stop. Instead, they began to invest and build. In the end, there was this city of desire in front of you. Why, sure. Now, of the 16 people back then, 6 have died, for have lost everything, and the remaining 6 have become the final victors. After so many years, they bid farewell to their unbearable past, built great achievements, and became miracles. They even controlled an entire independent city, joined the American City Alliance, and became a glorious part of it. He turned around and asked softly, "If it were you, how could you be in a good mood when the people of the utopia reappeared in front of you?" "But after so many years, didn't anyone care?" Huaisher asked. "Didn't you care either? How could a school far away at the border intervene in the current situation?" "Huaisher." Russell shook his head. "Don't be too harsh on your teachers, okay? You have to learn to be more tolerant." To Russell at that time, saving the ivory tower from the turmoil and a school from the waves that swept across the entire territory was already a miracle after sacrificing everything. Perhaps he still had the strength to do more, but in the face of the cold reality, he was already disheartened and unwilling to pay attention to it. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. If nothing had happened, he might have remained like this until he died of old age. Speaking of which, you're the one who let me see a turning point in the reconstruction of celestial genealogy. Russell turned around and looked at the student beside him, making Huaisher feel a little embarrassed. "It's just bringing back the Book of Destiny, and it can't be dismantled. It's not a big deal, right? What's important is the Book of Destiny, Huaisher." Luo Su smiled and didn't say anything else. He just could not help but recall, when Huaisher stood in front of him, when the traces of the Book of Destiny appeared in front of him again, how should he describe his feelings at that moment? Joy, fear, jealousy, killing intent, or shame? It was indescribable. When this young man carried a burden that did not belong to him and walked toward him in pursuit of the remnants of the utopia, Russell actually felt a fear that he had never felt before. He had not been defeated by the cruel fate, nor had he been obliterated by the cold world. The smile that was riddled with scars, but filled with love and joy for everything, was like a mirror. It reflected a completely unrecognizable version of himself. The version of himself who was gradually drowning in the anesthesia of his unrestrained self at that moment. He understood that perhaps this was the reason why the Book of Destiny did not choose him. The moment he gave up resisting fate, he had already abandoned this fate. However, it did not matter. He no longer cared. He did not have any hatred for this at all. Instead, he was filled with indescribable gratitude. The funny thing was that he had wanted to obtain the approval of the Book of Destiny all his life, but after giving up this dream, he finally understood himself. "You will definitely become someone who far surpasses me. Why, sure." He firmly believed in this and solemnly promised the student beside him, "Don't worry, this is my duty as a teacher." Huaisher was stunned and suddenly felt a little uneasy when he was looked at with such expectant eyes. He smelled the scent of an arrangement. "Why are you suddenly saying this?" he asked warily. "It's nothing. Don't be afraid." Russell suddenly smiled crookedly, raised his finger, and gestured an insignificant distance. "I just want to increase the difficulty for you a little. The new generation surpasses the old." Perhaps it was an unchanging principle since ancient times for students to surpass their teachers. However, no one said that only the new generation could chase after the new generation while the new generation had to stay put, right? Imagining his future students climbing the steep cliff tiredly with no end in sight, he became more and more delighted. "Let's go, we're here." When the moving vehicle slowly stopped, Russell stood up, patted him on the shoulder, and told him meaningfully, "Get ready." He said, "It'll be your turn soon." But right after that, his wrist was gripped so tightly that it was like an iron clamp, almost crushing his bones, not allowing him to struggle at all. "Take it with you when we meet later." The old man raised his eyes and stared at his son, who was right in front of him. His turbid eyes seemed to be flowing with hot lava, as if he wanted to burn his enemy's soul to ashes. He ordered with a pause between each word, Remember, William, I will only say these words once, the old man whispered hoarsely. If I don't give you permission, you can't speak. If anyone else speaks before me, you will use my gun to kill them. If anyone offends my guest, you will use it to kill his wife, parents, brothers, and children. Not even a dog can be left behind. Even if the person speaking is your uncle's, do you understand? Father. Why? William shook his head blankly, unable to understand. Really, is it really necessary to do this? He is only one person. As long as you are willing, we can make him pay any price. We can even ask the heavens. Idiot! The old man roared, his hoarse voice like thunder. Is it your turn to call the shots in my city? It was as if he wanted to brutally tear his eardrums and question his soul. William no longer had the courage to argue or refute. He lowered his head in horror. Very good. That's it, William. The old man coughed violently, but his expression became gratified. Dismiss all the people you arranged. Keep your head down and look at your feet. Don't look at his eyes, and don't hide your fear. You are a good child, William, but you are too young. You have to listen to me. He slowly let go of his hand, unable to hide his old age and powerlessness. He leaned on the bed. After a long time, William asked helplessly, Father, do you think we have no chance of winning at all? Idiot, what's the use of victory? The old man was amused. If you want to win, can you pay a sufficient price? You want to be the enemy of the world's craziest idealist, an opponent who is not afraid of physical destruction, who is not afraid of sacrifice, who does not care about the tragic consequences. Have you thought about the consequences? In the long silence, William fell into silence. He had nothing to say. Don't worry, Russell will retreat in the face of difficulties. William, the old man whispered hoarsely, one day you will get everything you deserve. That pair of turbid eyes quietly looked down at the city outside the window. It was like a dying beast staring at its own country. Before that, I won't let anyone take it away. When he got out of the car, Weischer's body suddenly tensed up for a moment. He frowned, because in front of him was not the bright lights of Las Vegas, but a military base with layers of barbed wire and machine guns. For a moment, Weischer thought that the other party was playing some trick of accidentally entering the White Tiger Festival Hall. But he immediately reacted. With Russell, this old bastard, there was no old fox who dared to show off his slight skill in front of an expert. Moreover, no matter how much he was underestimated, he was still a special military officer of the Astronomy Association, not to mention the White Tiger Festival Hall. Even if he rushed into the central decision-making room of the Central Bureau and jumped 300 times, as long as he didn't die, he would definitely be in the most comprehensive, serious, and unruffled internal court. As long as there was even the slightest bit of trickery, there would be 800 inspectors on the overhead floor with magnifying glasses to rummage through it to death. Why would he need to worry about this? He shook his head with a smile and looked around. In front of the open door, he saw a few people who were already so old that it was shocking. Their white hair was sparse, and their bodies were thin. Some were holding canes, some were supported by others, and some were sitting in wheelchairs with oxygen masks. It was as if they had been waiting for a long time, but there was no impatience at all. When Weischer and Russell got out of the car, they took the initiative to welcome them, accompanied by their children and medical staff. Nice to meet you, Mr. Russell. The old man in the wheelchair said in a hoarse voice, I greet you on behalf of the Las Vegas Business Alliance. How should I address you? Russell lowered his head and asked, Douglas. The old man suppressed the urge to cough and said, Just call me Douglas. Okay, Douglas. Russell nodded, looked past the wheelchair in front of him, and looked around. Does Las Vegas use a military base to receive guests? If you're here as a guest, we'll definitely welcome you, with open arms. All of Las Vegas will be your friends, and you'll be treated with the utmost respect wherever you go. If anyone dares to offend you, they'll become everyone's enemy. I can guarantee that. Douglas panted and asked hoarsely, "But you didn't come for this, did you?" "I believe that being open and honest is a good thing for both of us." Russell raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't expect the other party to be so frank. But soon he was puzzled again. "If you want to be enemies, just relying on this base in front of you isn't enough, right?" he said. "With your wealth, you should be able to hire at least 4 or 5 fifth-order soldiers. You might even be able to buy Tyr, your natural enemy, to fight for you." "Ha, you must be joking. For someone like you, these people in front of you are nothing." Douglas laughed self-deprecatingly. "Please rest assured, no matter what, we will not be disrespectful or rude to you today." He patted the armrest of the wheelchair and signaled the attendant behind him to turn around and walk to the front. "Please follow me." In front of him, the gates of the military base were opened layer by layer. Countless defenses were withdrawn from the center, and the gate was wide open. After walking in, Huaisher realized that this was not an ordinary base at all. On both sides of the long runway, in the open hangars, there were rows of fighter jets being repaired. Across the bustling military training ground, he could also see the missile launch site in the distance, and they were going deep underground. Riding in a vehicle, they passed through a deep tunnel. After traveling down for an unknown amount of time, a huge door appeared under the fortifications that could withstand a nuclear attack. In front of the metal door, Douglas panted weakly in his wheelchair and raised his finger. Very quickly, a subordinate walked forward and entered the password, verifying the iris, fingerprint, and origin substance. Once the 3 layers of encryption were removed, the door opened with a bang. Countless cold spotlights shone down from the ceiling, causing the resplendent golden light to sweep out like a flood. Huaisher's eyes were stung by the dazzling golden light, and he couldn't help but squint his eyes. He sucked in a breath of cold air. A sea of gold. This was a sea of gold, through and through. Countless trapezoidal gold bars were piled up into small mountains, towering in the underground warehouse, reflecting a brilliant light that made one's soul tremble. There were no cumbersome diamonds, nor were there any lie-like bonds. What was gathered here was the currency that humans had used since ancient times. This was a terrifying amount of wealth that could be compared to national reserves. Chapter 934. No matter who it was, when money appeared in front of their eyes on such a terrifying scale, it was inevitable that they would be stunned for a moment, as well as an instinctive impulse. In the silence, Huaisher's face was as calm as water, and there was no expression on his face. He was not moved at all, but secretly, he could not help but think quickly. He had already begun to calculate how to break through the defense and security on the ground, how many people, and what kind of tools would be needed to successfully take away such an unjust amount of dung, how to plan, how to gather people, how to find the weakness of the defense, how to enter and exit under the nose of the American army, and finally how to launder and divide the loot. By the time he pulled back his thoughts from the slippery slope, he had already missed the opportunity to express himself. Instead, it was Russell who whistled. He did not hide his admiration at all, and he sighed with emotion from the bottom of his heart. Is this the financial power of Las Vegas? It's really spectacular. By the way, how much is this? He turned around and asked, a total of 1,300 tons of gold, 210 tons of source crystals, and 400 tons of pure gold. In addition, there's also a key to the vault of the Bank of America here. All the relics of the border that flowed out of the black market back then are here. On the wheelchair, Douglas reached out and took a box from his subordinate's hand. He presented it with both hands. I know why you're here, Mr. Russell. We have no intention of arguing about what happened back then, but we're willing to pay the price for it. He said, we'll pay you back double. Just like that, he lowered his head, raised his hands high, and respectfully presented the assets and price that he had taken away back then. As long as you're willing to nod your head, at this moment, here, everything will belong to you. And Las Vegas will be your friend forever. In any dispute, if you appear on the opposite side, we'll retreat and never be your enemy. Russell smiled. He lowered his head, looked at the box, and flicked the ash off his cigarette. But he did not take it. How interesting, Douglas. Whether it's you or this world, you always surprise me. He sighed softly. It's been 70 years. 70 years ago, I didn't even know your name. 70 years later, you're already standing in front of me, negotiating with me. The world had changed so quickly. So many years had passed, and the Americas had changed from the wilderness to the 5 pillars of reality. The Republic had been born and fallen, and Las Vegas had changed from a deserted desert to a city of desire. Technology was advancing, the times were developing, and the currency was expanding. Every day was different from yesterday, and tomorrow would be different from today. Everything is improving and growing, and so are you. But it's like we're still stuck in the past, immersed in the afterglow of the past, unable to face the painful future. In the dead silence, no one responded. Only the old man's laughter became more mocking. 70 years ago, you seized the resources stored in the utopia and plundered the wealth we had accumulated. Using this as a foundation, you won a huge family business and assets. Now that 70 years have passed, and I'm here, you're telling me, don't be angry. We didn't do it on purpose. We intend to repay the principal. In order to prevent you from complaining, we can even double the price. It's as if I'm a beggar who came knocking on your door. He lowered his head in disbelief and asked, just how low have I fallen for you to embarrass me like this? In the long silence, no one responded. Only Douglas' heavy breathing under the oxygen mask could be heard. After a long time, the old man in the wheelchair replied in a hoarse voice, we're showing our sincerity, Mr. Russell. No one here dares to humiliate you. No, that's actually what you're doing, isn't it? Russell shook his head and sneered. It's just that the way you humiliate me makes people think that you're very polite. In fact, that's not the case, is it? Douglas, you have to understand that I'm not here for your friendship or your sincerity. He enunciated each word clearly. I just want to take back what's rightfully ours. You can name your price. Douglas raised his eyes. His weak eyes seemed to be burning with flames. This is also the reason why I'm here today. No matter what kind of compensation you want, we can talk about it. Russell chuckled softly. In other words, you're ready to negotiate? We'll do our best to put an end to disputes and break the peace, Mr. Russell. Douglas didn't back down. He replied calmly, the difference is whether you're willing to negotiate or not. Of course, why wouldn't I be willing? It's a peaceful era now. Would I go on a killing spree because of my personal feelings? Russell grinned and mocked. Douglas, if you want to negotiate, then I can negotiate for you. It's just that the person you want to negotiate with is not me. He paused for a moment and looked behind him. Not far away, Weisher, who was leaning against the door and taking a selfie with his back facing the mountain of gold, stiffened. He couldn't help but tremble. He couldn't believe it. What the hell? He was shocked and lost his voice. The people of Dongsha say that when the master has something to do, the disciple has to do it, right? Russell happily blew the smoke from his cigar. How about you replace me? Huh. Weisher felt his head swelling rapidly. It was like a balloon. His head hurt. So this is what you're talking about. Why did you arrange for me to do it for no reason? Don't look so resistant. Weisher. Isn't this what you should do as an assistant and secretary? Now that I think about it, you haven't done it even once. It's really a little dereliction of duty, Russell proposed excitedly. Since we happen to meet this time, I'll leave it to you, as if he had finally remembered his duty as a teacher. Russell looked as if he didn't mind the trouble, egging him on like a devil. It just so happens that I, as a teacher, can use some martial arts. Let's treat it as a social practice class. How about it? It's so troublesome to argue with both sides. Weisher shook his head decisively. If he had the time, he might as well do a talent show. Forget it. I'm not good at this kind of superficial work. That's the work for the subordinates. They don't have the responsibility and ability to bear the consequences, so they can only do it piecemeal and haggle over every penny to deduct a few cents of profit. It's like buying cabbage and cutting the price. Russell shook his head and said seriously, but what I'm going to teach you is not this, and it won't be so troublesome. It will be more direct and preserve the dignity of both sides. At the same time, it will be more straightforward. As a leader, how to express your attitude correctly is part of your duty. You should start learning why sure. As he said that, he spread his hands and suggested, let's start now. How about it? In the silence, the corner of Weischer's eyes twitched for a long time. He sighed helplessly. Everything had been arranged. What else could he do? Weischer nodded slightly. In a moment of trance, he realized that he was in the middle of a golden mountain surrounded by countless gold. Even the long table and chair in front of him were made of metal that could redeem souls. In the magnificent and solemn treasury, both sides of the long table were divided into two sides. Weischer sat at the front, feeling a little strange as he adapted to the feeling of being in the limelight. On the golden recliner behind him, Russell raised his hand, crushed the cigar in his hand, and began to talk about the first key point of today's lesson. First of all, before the negotiation begins, you need to explain to the other party the purpose of your visit. He asked the student in front of him as if he was teaching a child how to solve a problem step by step. Weischer, what is our purpose? Recover assets? Weischer was a little uncertain. It's too general. You need to set a scope and goal, and you need to draw a bottom line for yourself. Russell reminded him, what can you fight for, and what can you give up? Only when you understand these can you not be led by the nose by the other party. How do I set this? Weischer was confused. Russell waved his hand indifferently, not caring at all. Think about it yourself. You have to try. Return it 10 times. Ha 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 ha. Russell laughed. You are really easy to deal with. Weischer, the price is too low. If we do this, we will definitely be regarded as country bumpkins. Weischer thought for a moment and asked seriously, what if our purpose is to take everything away? You can try. Russell held his chin, full of expectation. Maybe it will work. On the opposite side of the long table, Douglas was expressionless, but behind him, the representatives of the Casino Alliance were already livid. How could they still not understand? Russell didn't care about the result of the negotiation at all. This old thing, treating this place as a kindergarten, treating power as a toy, putting it in the hands of a child, and admiring the way he wielded power. He was just here to bring the students to class, and they were the cheap models hanging on Russell's blackboard, the flasks and measuring cups in chemistry class, and the teaching tools used to explain theorems. Enough! Someone roared gloomily. Mr. Russell, don't you have any sincerity at all? No one responded. Only Douglas glanced to the side, indifferently. William nodded, reached into his pocket, held the pistol, and pulled it out. But his movements came to an abrupt halt. It was as if he had suddenly pressed the pause button. He was stiff in place. He couldn't move. Only a pair of eyes were full of confusion. Oh, an unexpected incident. Why, sure, someone is here to mess things up. Russell sighed. In fact, unexpected situations often occur in negotiations. For example, the other party can't suppress internal differences, causing someone to deliberately create an accident with the intention of affecting the process and result of the negotiation. He paused, like a teacher asking a question, and asked Weischer, "If it were you, what would you do?" "It's me?" Weischer asked. "Yes, it's you. You're the one in charge now." Weischer. "Don't care about my opinion. Whether it succeeds or fails, it's just a practical assessment. And it's the kind of learning and applying." Russell said patiently, "You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter." Weischer thought for a moment and shrugged. "To be honest, I don't like idiots who pretend to be stupid and muddy the waters." He said, "I'll chop off his head." "Too violent. Weischer. Lacking grace and bearing. 1 point deducted." Russell shook his head. He was a little helpless about this student's habitual violent style. "But since you said so, then I'll chop off his head." He raised his finger and tapped on the gold of the armrest. He issued a mock judgment of death penalty. In an instant, the sluggish objector was frozen in place. There was nothing above his neck. But he didn't die. He didn't even shed a drop of blood. It was as if something terrible had taken it and hidden it. He raised his hand blankly and touched the empty space above his neck. He seemed to be screaming in horror, but he couldn't hear a sound and didn't understand what had happened. He ran aimlessly in fear. In the end, he was dragged down by someone who reacted. Only now did William finally regain consciousness. It was as if he didn't hear anything. Weischer, on the other hand, didn't seem to care about the consequences. He was eager to try. "Next, I guess I should tell them the consequences of refusing." "Aren't you going to try to make a promise?" Russell thought for a moment and shrugged. "Forget it. Although I skipped a part, it doesn't matter. Negotiations are flexible. You should try. You're that assured." Weischer asked. "Yes." Russell smiled. "I'm that assured when it comes to you." Weischer thought for a moment and asked, "So it's settled?" "It's settled." Russell nodded, not caring at all. He casually pushed everything to the gambling table. They had a tacit understanding, but everyone only felt that it was ridiculous. It was hard to understand. There must be something wrong with this old thing's brain. How could a normal person have such a negotiation method? Just a word of disagreement and disagreements and a round of poker? As for the consequences they talked about, was there a need to use pale words to explain it? One was one of the few level 5 sublimators in the entire territory, the ruler of the ivory tower. After the fall of the kingdom of heaven, he held on to the last bit of foundation and even began to try to revive it. The other was a disaster sword who had a lot of blood debts since his debut. He had outstanding meritorious deeds and mountains of corpses behind him. He was the favorite of the Astronomical Society and a special military officer who was known as the strongest tool in history. One dared to think, and the other dared to do. One dared to teach, and the other dared to learn. When the golden wind and the jade dew met, it was better than countless things in the human world. When these two lunatics got together, was there anything they did not dare to do? An old man and a brat who was not even 20 years old came here empty-handed, and then opened their big mouths to the rulers here. They wanted to swallow everything and leave nothing behind. They would not compromise for anything. This was not a negotiation at all, but a naked declaration of war. If they could not achieve their goal, they would use all means and even an all-out war between the two sides. Don't you people of the utopia speak reason at all? At the other end of the long table, Douglas gasped hoarsely, his eyes widened in anger, and his sharp voice was so loud. "We have made our greatest efforts and sacrifices for peace. But do you really think that we are weak and can be bullied? Las Vegas is not afraid of war, both of you. He retorted hoarsely. We will never sit still and wait for death. This city is our blood, sweat, and tears, and we will never take half a step back. You can give it a try. If you want to fight to the death, then so be it. Even if we have to bleed to the last drop of blood and spend the last cent of our savings, we will never bow our heads. Why do you have to be so pitiful, old man? Huaishur laughed and did not even bother to lift his eyelids. It's as if we asked for your opinion from the beginning, as if you weren't talking to yourself from the beginning. Today, you bowed your head not to pay for the mistakes of the past, but to protect everything you have now. He said, I have seen many people like you. In Dongsha, we call such people deadbeats. They rely on their relationships and connections to occupy things that do not belong to them. They despise the law, belittle the efforts and dignity of others, and think that they have mastered the rules of this world, but they are not. If one day the hammer falls, they will become incomparably humble and pitiful again. They will have sincerity and restraint, and they will begin to yearn for peace again. It's as if all this is not what they should bear. Thus, looking at his livid face, Huaishur told him coldly, the reason why you admit your mistakes is just to avoid losses. You say you are sincere, but in fact, you only think about yourself. You took us to the military base in America and gave us some prepared leftovers so that we, the uninvited guests, would leave quickly. You think you are showing your sincerity. However, from the beginning until now, I have not even heard a word of sorry from your mouth. However, now that things have come to this, you actually say that we are unreasonable. Huaishur shook his head and laughed. For so many years, the truth has been there, but no one has said it. Now that we've brought it here, has it suddenly become precious? If you want reason, Mr. Douglas, I will give you reason. Huaishur told him coldly, together with war. Chapter 936. He did not leave any room for negotiation, nor did he give the old man who was pretending to be in a sorry state any room for negotiation. When Huaishur sat at the negotiating table, no, earlier than that, when the old man in front of him thought that he had offered his sincerity, when Russell got off the plane with Huaishur and came to this city, all of this was destined. Whether his attitude was bad, polite, or gentle, there would be no difference in what happened next. There were only two choices left for the other party. Yes or no? This represented the fundamental position of the ivory tower as the orthodox inheritance of the utopia. At the same time, it was also the crucial first step in the reconstruction of celestial genealogy. If they encountered a setback here, then what happened next would simply be a joke. It was just like if Huaishur did not sell the first step for the ivory tower in the present, everything else would not exist. Rome, the Russian Federation, Eastern Xia, Egypt, and even the Americas, the P5, the 5 major genealogies, the whole world, and even the remnants of the utopia were all watching their actions. They held the chips in their hands, witnessing their actions. Was there a need to rebuild celestial genealogy when they could not even deal with a deadbeat from Las Vegas? Wouldn't it be better to go back, wash up, and sleep early? It was absolutely impossible to retreat. There was only one choice left for Huaishur, and that was to win. He had to win. He had to win beautifully so that no one could say anything about it. Otherwise, no matter how much money he got, it would just be the travel expenses for the loser to go home. Russell, on the other hand, was not afraid at all. He did not seem to be worried at all. He just sat by the side and quietly enjoyed his performance. He was full of confidence and anticipation. In the silence, only Douglas' hoarse breathing could be heard. It seems that the ivory tower wants to start with us first. He seemed to have finally figured everything out and could not help but sneer. "Aren't you afraid of breaking your teeth?" Huaisher grinned. It was unknown if he was mocking or simply wanted to show off his neat and white teeth. "It's not the ivory tower. It's celestial genealogy. Las Vegas will never be trampled on by others. Then rise up and resist," Huaisher solemnly suggested. "Mobilize your connections, squander your money, hire your troops, recruit your lackeys, prepare your troops and horses, and rest on your spears for the dawn of the day. Before that happens, close your cities, close your shops, and stop your businesses. Tell every resident here what they're going to face, and tell everyone who comes here what's going to happen. Destroy everything you have before we take it from you." Huaisher chuckled softly. This is also a kind of mutual destruction. It was just like the bubble that Russell had once mocked. Even though Huaisher longed for prosperity and prosperity from the bottom of his heart, he had never thought that Donbua would become like this. Casinos, erotic services, luxury goods, insatiable desires, and never enough money. This was not a city, but a giant adult amusement park, a dream factory built to satisfy human desires. Relying on its unique position and the unprecedented opportunity to build the city of desire from the very beginning, it was not a place that could make people feel like they belonged. It was too easy to destroy this city. It was so easy that there was no need for a war at all. It only needed a signal of the coming war. No other external forces were used, and no soldiers were needed. This city gathered because of desire would also collapse because of desire. Indeed, in the present situation, it was difficult to use the ivory tower. But when Huaisher pushed them to the edge of the cliff, they would understand that once the war began, regardless of success or failure, they had already lost. Even if they had abundant financial resources, even if they had many treasures. It seems that you understand this better than I do, don't you? Huaisher stared at the old man and the people behind him. You are not willing to bear the consequences, nor are you willing to face the outcome. You can't pay the accounts you once owed, and you can't face the tragic outcome. Because of the combination of wealth and interests, you think you are allies, but in fact, you are just grasshoppers tied to the same rope. As soon as the flame starts to ignite, you will drag the burned rope and go your separate ways. Russell is not willing to negotiate with you because this negotiation has not had any problems from the beginning. You think that by destroying jade and common stone, you can make us hesitate, but from the beginning to the end, we only need to use you to express our determination. He finally paused for a moment and told them. Now, you can give your answer. He asked coldly, when will the war between us begin? A month, a week, or now? In the dead silence, Douglas's expression twitched. After a long time, he seemed to have finally made up his mind. He closed his eyes. There will be no war. Why sure? When the door opened with a bang, a familiar voice sounded. As long as America still exists. At that moment, Douglas's tense body relaxed, and he let out a long breath. Russell tilted his head and lit his third cigar of the day. He was not surprised by the unfolding in front of him at all. Instead, he had expected it. After all, there was no reason in the world that would dare to let them repeatedly jump at the door. Only Huaisher's expression froze. The look in his eyes was indescribably complicated. After a long time, he rubbed his eyebrows and sighed softly. Long time no see, Liz. He said, How have you been? The girl walked into the vault with an indifferent expression. She was wearing a red coat that represented noble blood, as if she was patrolling her own territory. She looked down at everything in front of her arrogantly. I'm fine, she said from the bottom of her heart, but I hope you're not. Things are unpredictable, aren't they? Huaisher shrugged and turned to glare at Russell. He suspected that this was also within the old bastard's expectations. However, Russell turned into a polar bear again. He looked innocent, as if he didn't know what he was talking about, which made him gnash his teeth in anger. America respects the ideas and decisions of the Ivory Tower, but we will never allow the Astronomy Club to violate the amendment and interfere with the internal affairs of the present state. Liz sat down at the other end of the long table and naturally took over the negotiating position. She told Weisher, "We will never give up any rights on our own territory." This was Douglas's saving grace, reinforcements from the American lineage, after lobbying many members of Parliament and noble blood, promising many benefits and rewards, the protection in exchange. By chance, they had invited the person Weisher didn't want to face the most. This was the worst result. Under Liz's cold and threatening gaze, Weisher guiltily averted her gaze. He bowed his head to the victim. However, before Douglas had time to rejoice at Weisher's weak performance, he heard the voice on the other side. "We're old acquaintances, and we've been through so much together. Don't you want to avoid it because of the benefits?" In an instant, the old man's smile froze on his face. He turned to look at Liz beside him in shock, and then looked at Weisher's helpless expression. The more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. The scumbag's eyes were honest with guilt, and the serious expression of recognition with resentment. These two people, it seemed, maybe there was something wrong. "Avoid it?" Liz sneered. "Weisher, do you still need to avoid it? I have a conscience. I still have to avoid it when it's necessary." Weisher sighed and spread his hands. "I'm begging for mercy. Can we talk to someone else? In your dreams?" Liz leaned on the chair and looked up at him. "Do you want to change your head? I recommend you to a hospital run by a Skinner. They're skilled. In 5 minutes, your head can be turned into a wine glass, the kind with goblets. That good? If you have time, we can talk about it together." Weisher smiled and looked at the girl in front of him. He asked curiously, "So, who are we talking to, Liz? If I represent celestial genealogy, then who are you representing? The Ivy League?" He paused and said teasingly, "Or the American genealogy? As a noble of American blood, I've been given full authority to deal with this matter." Liz said calmly, "What I say is equivalent to what the American genealogy says. Don't you think this is a coincidence?" Weisher spread his hands and shrugged. He glanced at Russell behind him meaningfully. "Old bastard, do you look familiar? Why are everyone's ideas and routines the same these days? You don't even care about such a big matter, and you want to find an agent? Just like that, you casually handed over the task of establishing the future relationship between the American genealogy and celestial genealogy to the two new generations. You're too careless." Russell was still in a state of excitement. He smoked, drank beer, and even took a bucket of popcorn from somewhere. He was already in a state of excitement. It was as if he was watching a show and didn't mind the drama. Fight. He really couldn't count on this old guy. Weisher shook his head and sighed. He said to Liz, "In that case, it seems that I can talk to someone higher up than you." "There's no higher up." "Weisher," Liz retorted indifferently. "The only one who will talk to you is me." "No, there is." Weisher shrugged and held up the lit screen of his phone with his fingers. On the screen, a phone number was spinning with Weisher's fingertips. He said, "For me, there's a more suitable one." Liz's expression froze and immediately became colder, because at the top of the number page, a young face was smiling proudly through the screen. "How's your uncle, Mr. Izzy?" Weisher asked with concern. "We're old acquaintances. Speaking of which, I didn't expect that the high priest of the living god, Mamakiria, would condescend to become my friend. You see, Liz, we always have some fate in strange places." "Then I'll have to disappoint you." "Weisher," Liz mocked. Liz said mockingly, Although my uncle likes to mess around, he can't do anything when it comes to such a big matter. But he's easy to talk to. Weisher spread his hands and sighed. That's the difference, Liz. Since I'm talking to the American genealogy, why don't I talk to Mr. Izzy? Even if it's a success or failure, the friendship between the two of us will improve. He paused and smiled mischievously. But if it's the other way around, I'm afraid you won't feel good, right? Chapter 937. For a moment, Liz's eyes became colder and colder. As the one who had been given full authority, if Weisher bypassed her and directly reached an agreement with Izzy, no matter what the outcome was, her position would probably be very awkward. The simplest thing was that it was difficult to get rid of the label of incompetence. Even if Izzy Hector was her uncle and would not embarrass her, who knew what her uncle would do when he lost his mind? After all, Mamakiria was very indulgent of her high priestess, the noble goddess, who was known as the doting mother, liked to raise the children she liked the most. She could be said to be a crazy person, and those who were valued by her without exception were almost all rare heroes and villains that were hard to come by in 100 years. Otherwise, there would not be a weirdo like Izzy. What was worse was that what if Mamakiria felt that Weisher had a promising future and wanted to train him? When this adoptive mother of the American genealogy sided with an outsider, all the children would be a little overwhelmed. Liz frowned and asked solemnly, "Are you threatening me, Weisher?" "You know, I've always respected you." "Okay, sorry, I can understand your unpleasant impression of me. In fact, I really want to apologize to you, and it's not a problem to retreat. But it's a pity that I'm not the only one." Weisher raised his hands in surrender, thought for a moment, and proposed seriously, "How about this? I've decided to increase the loan amount from the Bank of America for the second phase of Damwa's construction, and I'll give priority to your Rongguan group during the bidding. How about that? I've been wanting to build a luxury hotel in the city center for a long time. Is this your price?" Liz could not help but laugh. Perhaps this might be a huge etiquette for ordinary people, but for the American genealogy, it was not worth mentioning at all. "Not for the American genealogy, just for you," Weisher replied solemnly. "No matter what you think I have to apologize to you before we officially start. You can accept it. Well, the old debt between you and me will be settled separately. How about it?" Liz was stunned. "Wow, your name is in my city? Sounds great." Outside the negotiation table, the hidden projection of the feathered serpent chuckled softly. She lamented to Russell beside her. Where did he learn such an extravagant way of apologizing? "I didn't teach him that." White Bear, who was holding a beer, shrugged innocently. "It's probably the nature of scumbags. I learned it all by myself. But it was done beautifully, wasn't it?" Feathered Snake clicked her tongue and sighed. After he expressed his stance, he seized his opponent's weakness to test the pressure. At the same time, he took the initiative to make up for it, to prevent his opponent from using it as a pretext to make a fuss. If I were a normal girl, I would forgive him even if he cheated on me behind my back. Ha! Don't look at everyone like a schemer, okay? Russell sighed. "I think he might just want to apologize. That's the trickiest part, Russell." Feathered Snake shook her head and lamented, if it was just a simple trick or a negotiation strategy, who would be easily moved by someone with a firm stance. But it's this kind of undisguised kindness and sincerity that makes people feel afraid. It's like the kind of person who is very good to everyone and is very gentle to everyone. He clearly doesn't do it on purpose, but he will give people the illusion that he is special. Such pure kindness, such a sincere attitude, coupled with such a terrifying charisma, from a certain point of view, it was simply dangerous to the extreme. For people who were experienced in the ways of the world, in different attitudes, and vicious conspiracies were not rare. In this cold world, this was the norm. Therefore, everyone was used to haggling over the smallest details and scheming against each other. And that kind of kindness was like a strong poison. It would make people unknowingly let down their guard and easily open the sealed door, making them fall into a passive state, even if it could not solve the problem fundamentally. But there were many things that could be discussed once the discussion started. Letting Liz preside over the negotiation was precisely the most disadvantageous thing for her. The more familiar people were with Weisher, the more they should be able to understand the nature of this guy. Anyone who had never dealt with Weisher before would probably not fall for his tricks. "You're also a bad guy." Russell glanced at her from the corner of his eyes. "We're the same, aren't we?" Feathered Snake shook her head indifferently. "I just threw the work of American genealogy to my subordinates, but you bet the debut of celestial genealogy on the students. In terms of courage, I'm not as good as you. Why would a rich man with a big business compete with a poor homeless man in courage?" Russell chuckled softly and looked at the negotiation table. "Since the chips have been placed, it's up to the children next. Whether it succeeds or not, we can always look forward to the future, right?" "The future." Feathered Snake sighed softly and said no more. On the negotiation table, Weisher probed again. "Now it seems that we can start the next stage of the negotiation. What? Are you going to name your price and promise your conditions?" Liz seemed to have already understood the process that Russell taught her, and was not moved. "What price do you have to make the American genealogy waiver?" "Weisher, don't overestimate yourself." "Don't worry, I always know what I'm worth." Behind the American genealogy stood 1.5 living gods. God knew how many hells belonged to them in the dark. Mutants, which could be seen everywhere, did not have any psychological pressure to consume them. Only an idiot would experiment on a living person. In this regard, he had already inferred after communicating with the Grand Master Mikhail. The Ivy League most likely wanted to crack these technologies and apply them on the solar ephemeris. But the Grand Master was also confused about the solar ephemeris. He only guessed, based on the clues over a long period of time, that it was most likely a strategic hell weapon of the American genealogy. If it could be combined with an energy device like the Immortal Machine, it would certainly be of great benefit, right? "Don't worry, I'm not interested in that kind of thing, and I don't intend to get it back from the Americans. Don't look at me like this. There are still people in the Continuation Academy who owe me a favor." Weisher knocked on the table and continued, "But you must have a headache, right? There's no progress in reverse cracking or anything. Although the art of forging and alchemy are of the same level, the Immortal Machine is highly linked to the Eternal Core, and it's not so easy to deal with." When he smiled, his expression was particularly gloating. As the only forger in the present realm, Weisher knew all too well. The Immortal Machine was indeed unable to bring true immortality. It only transformed the user into an eternity of suffering, unable to escape from the sludge. But in essence, this was the technology of turning a solidified soul into a source battery. It was a renewable and pollution-free energy source. It definitely involved more than the technology of one Forger King. Not to mention how difficult it was to reproduce all this without the cooperation of the Sunmaker. "It's been so long. How much have you grasped?" Weisher guessed. 10%. 20? No. With the Ivy League's technical ability, it should be about 70%, right? He paused for a moment and said solemnly, "Please tell the researchers that they've reached the limits of alchemy's simulation and understanding so quickly, as expected of the Ivy League. Unfortunately, the next step is not in the field of alchemy. That was the great crystallization of the forgers. It would not be easy to replicate it. Liz retorted indifferently. We can solve it. Yes, definitely. Nothing in the world is difficult. I'm afraid it's cost-effective. But are you willing to invest so many resources to gamble on the results? In fact, as long as there's a grand master in the right field, it's not a problem at all. But which grand master would be willing to change his research direction for this kind of thing and then spend more than 40 years to study it again? Especially since there were 2 grand masters missing recently. They were simply short of manpower,